Creating complex diagrams in PowerPoint is something that a lot of people struggle with. What I'm going to do in this video is show you some very simple techniques to very quickly produce quite complicated diagrams and flowcharts using a grid system. So some people might be somewhat surprised if I tell you that there is a fairly straightforward method of producing a diagram of some complexity like this in PowerPoint in 5, 10, maybe up to 15 minutes. Now there is a trick to it, and the trick is to envisage the diagram and the shapes of the diagram as on a grid structure. I'll show you on the next page what I mean. So in this particular case, there are basically, even though some of the shapes are bigger or smaller, and some go across entire sections of the grid structure, there's pretty much 4 rows of shapes, and there are 8 columns of shapes. And I'll show you on the next page why we're doing this. Now, what I've done here is reproduce a picture of that layout, so you can see what it is that we're trying to reproduce. If you were working on this yourself, you might, for example, have an A4 piece of printout or a rough sketch that you or somebody else has done that you've drawn a grid structure onto, to get the rough sense of how the shapes are going to fall in the grid. Now the first thing to do is to go into this section here, in the view menu, and just make sure you select snapped objects to grid. Grid setting, this 5 grids per centimetre is fine. I'm not sure what that is in inches, but you can make it a bit larger, but this works fairly well. Make sure snap to grid is on, say OK, and what we're going to do is just basically put one shape in to start. So I'm going to start with a rectangle. Now I'm going to use the shift key to constrain that rectangle to a square, so we get a nice even-sided grid structure once we're done. So create that one shape. Now, to save myself a bit of grief later, I'm going to press F2, and I'm just going to type some text. Put the text in, and I'm going to make that black and about 14 point. And actually, it doesn't really matter for the purposes. We'll make it Arial. This is a very commonly used font on diagrams. So that's our first square. So that's the first square of the grid up here. Now what we're going to do is select that, press Shift and Control together, drag that shape across once, twice, and another time, and that's basically the first 4 squares here. Now we can select that, Shift and Control again, line that nicely. Now we've got basically the top row created. And all we have to do now is, again, Shift and Control together to make copies of that entire row. And there we have essentially that grid now set up on this page, made out of PowerPoint shapes, with text already in each of them. So we don't have to individually go in and add text later. We can just adjust the text that's in there. Now the first thing to do is to select all the shapes in the grid, right click, group, and that's it, group, and get a rough, we're going to have to adjust this later, but just get them roughly positioned in the space on the page. You probably want space for a title up here. And now ungroup, so right click, or you Control G also does this, ungroup, deselect. And now all we're going to have to do to get the basic structure of the diagram is delete the squares where we've got space. So essentially take out the ones we don't need. So this one here, and this one, and this one, and this one, and then those 2. If I delete those, there you can see I'm starting to create the same structure as we've got on the grid here. Then we don't want that one. We don't need those two. And we only need one shape for that big square. So let's delete like so. There we go. Now you want to select all of the shapes and be careful here what you do. Take the top right hand handle on one of the shapes, shift and control, and you probably can't see too well, but essentially I'm sizing that on this together, all of them together, but in the center of each individual shape, and that's going to create a nice every single shape basically is spaced out correctly, nice and evenly. Is the same size to start off with. So now I've got the basic structure of the diagram, and I just need to adjust individual shapes that don't quite fall into the grid in the same way. So I'll use shift to select both of those, drag those down to get those long shapes there. I've actually got too many shapes here. I missed that one, so I'll delete those, select that, and drag that one down. This one, pull it across to get this nice big square here, like so. And this one's is very small, and this one's much bigger. And there we have it. I'm going to select them all again and group them, and just resize the whole diagram on the page so it fits nice and evenly. There we go. Select again, ungroup, and start doing the individual coloring. So I'll use the control button to multiple select, make each of these the yellow color. Actually they're blue, aren't they? But you get the idea. Those are yellow. Again, using shift for multiple select. I'm going to speed this up because you don't get the general idea, I'm sure, by this point. Make those all a orange color, and these are green. And then it's just basically a matter of going and add whatever text would be relevant. I haven't bothered with creating dummy versions of things for this example, and adding the arrows in. So just draw those in. Make sure you use the connectors. So use the long one here, and so on. Probably you'll want to make the connectors a bit wider in line weight, like so. I stopped recording at this point. Went and had a look at the amount of time it took us to create most of that diagram. It was about 7 minutes. Now I'm pretty used to doing this kind of work. I've used PowerPoint for years. I've done diagrammatical work. I've done hundreds of these types of things, working in banking and various corporations and management consultancies. So it's likely I'm going to be able to put something like this together pretty quickly. But you should find, if you use this method, that it cuts down the amount of time that you do take over doing a diagram like this quite considerably. I'd be surprised if it doesn't cut it in half. At the very least, as opposed to just trying to arrange the shapes of the eye and, on the page, and arrange them roughly by eye and resize them. So hopefully, if you try this method out, it works for you. I'd love to hear some feedback on whether you found this method useful. Leave some comments below if you give it a go and come back to the video and just let me know. That would be fantastic. Thanks very much.